I now want to invite my dear colleague Andreas on stage. He's the head of sales at JENTIS, former agency manager of Google, and he was responsible, among a lot of things at Google, for all the privacy measurements in Austria and Switzerland.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you so much. And I'm super happy now to welcome you to the panel about remarketing and personalization in the cookieless future. And I'm very pleased that we have four amazing panelists. First on stage, I want to welcome the president of the IAB Austria. For those of you who don't know what the IAB is, it's more or less the voice of the advertisers in Austria. So welcome on stage, Markus Blank. Second, let me welcome a representative of dentsu Austria, client partner dentsu Austria. Dentsu is part of a big agency network which includes Karat, which is a global leader among media agencies, iProspect, a global leading performance marketing agency, and Merco, a truly data-driven full-service agency. So let's welcome on stage Barbara Klinser-Kammerzelt. Next, I want to invite someone on stage who has already given a presentation today. He is active member of the IAB Europe and spokesperson of the executive board and CTO of Virtual Minds, Tom Peruzzi. And last but not least, I want to welcome the Chief Innovation Officer of EssenceMediacom. EssenceMediacom is Group M's largest and newest agency. Essence is probably most or best known for their data DNA, and Mediacom is probably best known for their know-how in the traditional media industry. So let's welcome on stage Kati Förster. So thank you so much for joining the panel. Before we kick off the panel discussion, I want to quickly take the time to pull you into the topic. So the topic, I already announced it, it's remarketing and personalization in the cookieless future. But at least for me, it's always interesting to also talk about what has brought us to the status quo. And if we think about the cookieless future, and this of course is not exhaustive, but if you think about the drivers that brought us here, it's of course data protection. So it's concerns over users' privacy in the end. It's regulatory changes that have driven the development. So in Europe, we know it's the GDPR, but we also have it all over the globe, CCPA and so on and so forth. But not only the regulatory environment has driven the changes to get us here, it's also the platforms which have contributed a big part. So at least most of the platforms already, or actually all of them have at least announced the end of the third-party cookie. And years ago, this was a big shock. Now we are waiting for the last ones to make the final steps. And third of all, what has also driven the development to the status quo today, of course, is the user. Because in the end, over the whole discussion, the user has become much more aware of their privacy preferences in the end, right? Yes, so what we want to discuss today is not only what brought us here, how is the market feeling about it, and how prepared is the market, but we also want to discuss what are potential solutions, what's a potential way forward, and maybe also what should have happened in the past already, and what should happen in the near past. All right, so before I have my questions to you, I do have some questions for the audience. It's 3 questions, so maybe yes, turn on the light. And just by the show of hands, who's familiar with the buzzword cookieless future? Okay, that should be everyone. Perfect. And who has the feeling that their organization is already prepared for it somehow? Somehow is a good definition, right? Okay, so I'd say it's like 30 to 40%. Okay, and who thinks that their organization has a particularly strong strategy in place? Okay, I'm very happy I see my colleagues from JENTIS raising their hands. Okay. Okay, but nothing surprising. So thank you so much. In general, we want to keep it very interactive. We're going to have various parts to our discussion. You can always raise your hand, and Margot will have her eyes open and see who has a question. And otherwise, we also will have 5 minutes to spare, hopefully in the end, to then have a Q&A. All right. So, Markus, my first question goes to you, and this is more in a sense of how is the industry feeling about this, right? And from my experiences, and this is also how I introduced you as the president of the IAB, and I always have known the IAB as being very representative, or at least having a very good feeling about how the market is feeling. And what do you think about the readiness of agencies and advertisers in Austria? So on a scale of we have no clue to we have a very strong strategy in place, and maybe give us some nuances, what makes the difference between companies and agencies that have a strong idea about it and those who don't?
I think we have seen now some raised hands, and you said almost 40 to 50% are known about the developments. I would say this is the average of the market. We reached a relevant level of awareness in the topic. That's good. The weak point is or the issue in Austria is that we love to look on others what they are doing. Because it's easier to follow than to be the early adopter, and this is bad in the small market where everyone is looking at each other and see and no one is going further or forward as a leader, and in that part we have to progress faster. But as we've seen with the first question, almost all of us heard about it. This is an advantage. If I'm looking back at May 2018, where we were all surprised by the GDPR, with this topic, it's completely different.
Very interesting. And what do you think keeps? Like, is it a cultural thing, or is it about investment decisions? Like, what keeps companies from taking a step, and what would it mean for them if they would take a step in a market which is slow to adopt?
In my opinion, it's mostly an investment question. As a small market, you have to have refinancing models as well. With the potential audiences or the ad spend, we can decrease probably, or we have to increase. It's different to refinance the investments of several technologies. This is different in bigger countries with bigger audiences or bigger ad spends.
And is there some way of exchange on an IAB level, maybe also on a European level, Tom, where we say that companies in, let's say, Germany, because we also talked about this before the panel, that they are quicker to adopt and quicker to find a strategy?
Quicker is a risky word. I would say yes, there is a lot of exchange. And the thing is that whoever has the time and resources to collaborate on an IAB Europe level, that's normally a little bit larger companies, and they have the privilege to be there. Why do I say privilege? Because it's on the one hand side, it's a privilege and it's accountability, because the ones who have enough resources to participate in how the market is shaped, they, on the other hand side, have the obligation to run a little bit up front and build solutions which later fit for the whole market ideally, and not just for them, because at the end, even the largest publishers and the largest advertisers should be interested in a vivid and working market. And so if you collaborate on IAB Europe level, then you have the privilege of being there, of having the chance to somehow create the market and create the solutions. On the other hand side, you have the obligation to educate and share the results so that they get accessible for the whole market.
And maybe, Markus, you can also help me to understand, because I think it's very interesting, and the role of the IAB is playing in kind of like as an association. I guess you're already doing a lot of education and activation around this, but is there something that you would kind of like also recommend companies to do? Is it like contributing to the IAB? Is it like being so brave and taking the first step, or?
The responsibility of the IAB is in one part being a representation for something, or building standards, talking about standards, building platforms to collaborate with each other. I mean, Babsi has the best knowledge about education in the market from her, let me say, it's a side job. Yeah, it's a side job. So there's also a lack of knowledge, technical knowledge that you have to have, and all the companies need the employees who understand what we are talking about. I mean, we see here an audience of specialists. And there are so many companies outside, different market needs, and we have too less people to talk with each other.
Yeah.
And so we have to invest into education, into collaboration with other countries as well. So we all have the same problems.
Yeah.
This is not an Austrian problem right now.
Yeah.
So we have to collaborate.
Okay, very interesting. So nice transition, Babsi. Is there a knowledge gap? Also, maybe not only referring to your side gig as in the educational space, but also is there a knowledge gap within the companies?
Yes, so I think there are several knowledge gaps, and they are based on, I think, one important issue when we not only talk about the technical and technological buzzwords, but it's the resource question and the question of talents. And if I also may ask the audience, is there anyone who is not looking for talent right now? Okay, so we don't have to put on the lights. So we see one thing that makes us maybe slow or keeps us from really doing things the way we should do it, that we don't have the people to do it, and then we don't have the organizations and the structures to build. And I think this is also one important part of talking about the cookieless future, because we know there are still or already a lot of things happening without cookies. I still have to teach what cookies are. So I think since 2018, I start lectures in digital marketing with, they will go away, but this year I will tell you the last time what cookies are about, third-party cookies, and then the next year I repeat the sentence and it's going somewhere strange because you can't stop talking about it. And this is one important part, and what I also think, and maybe I'm talking also a little bit for the IAB now, we are also ready in the Austrian market from the perspective of publishers maybe, because we can remember and think of our strengths we have. So when we talk about publishers, they still have a lot of local trust. And we don't need a lot of third-party cookies there and don't need all the technical stuff. So there are things we can base our advertising on, and there won't be a shock like GDPR or people working longer in the space. I started with 120 times 90 pixels buttons. Then there was that shock, Flash doesn't work no more. This was an awful experience for everyone because it was so surprising. I think we are better now. Also, our clients are aware of what's happening. We are talking and preparing it, but there are things next to technology that really keep us from implementing things, and that's a talent and resource topic, I would say.
And maybe from an agency perspective, because I assume that there are clients which you work with who are already kind of like on the edge of this topic and being first movers. Are they doing anything differently, or how are they doing it differently? Is it or is it the organization, how it's set up? Is it the C-suite, which just is much more familiar with it, or is it the agency involved?
I think it's really a combination of all of the things. So you can be the most innovative agency if you work with a client that doesn't have the resources, the will, the openness to do that, or the staff and the size to start with. You won't be able to implement it. So we are working with JENTIS just right now on implementing it in a big groups of companies, starting with one of them. So to test it, and you have to have the legal department involved a lot. So it takes a lot of time to get into things doing. You need the technological partners, and then you have to set up all the stuff and work very integrated, I would say. And this is also something that's quite complicated for many companies. As soon as they have a certain size, you have to get all the departments and teams together, because it's not only media, it's not only creative, it's not only analytics or conversion rate optimization. So it's a lot of different things and people to talk to each other, and then the complexity starts.
And one thing I quickly want to touch on is the willingness, because you mentioned there's resource constraints and so on and so forth, but there's also the willingness which needs to be there to kind of like have that change. And also for me as a salesperson in a SaaS environment, it's always, like resources being cited as a constraint. But what do you think about the priorities that companies set as of today, and why is the cookieless future, why is data sovereignty, why is a first-party data strategy not priority number one for pure play companies sometimes?
I think there are some possible answers to it. One, I would say, is also that companies do face a lot of challenges next to just the cookieless future that we will be able to handle somehow, because just look at what has happened the last 2, 3 years, 4 years. So the VUCA world is even increasing the pace we live in. We are talking about AI and stuff like that. And in all that parts that C-level CMO has to deal with, the cookieless future is one of it. So I think this is one project that's very important. And if you do it on a proper basis, it will affect a lot of different topics too, and you will gain insights from that for other points. But there are so many challenges, and you really have to prioritize here.
Tom, please.
May I just say one word? Because in 2019, for the DMEXCO in Cologne, we once did the first push of NetID from a publisher through the whole programmatic chain to an agency, and then the advertiser, it was ADAC together with Service Plan Group, and the publisher was United Internet. So we did the first full programmatic campaign being supported by the NetID, and and the numbers were really great. So they were much better than everything you can do with the cookie, and we thought, wow, this is mind-blowing, this is a breakthrough, and in 2020 we will get rid of that ugly cookie. And what we learned then is that on the one hand side, my product guys learned to hate me because I pushed for all kind of identifiers. On the other hand side, what we learned is that what hinders often, beside all those, everything you said, totally appreciated, but what we even learned too is that the question was always, how is it compared to the cookie? So it was not, what does the new solution bring me? What's the benefit for it? What can it make better? It was more like, can I leave everything as is to make my life as simple as possible? Because for whatever reason, time, resources, whatever. So it was not, what is the new solution? What's the true value of the new solution? It was always the question, is it as close to the cookie as possible? And will there be no fragmentation? Will this be the one identifier which rules them all? Rather than what's the benefit of it? So it was much more the reluctance to do a real leapfrog, but rather trying to keep the system running, but changing from fuel to another type of fuel.
Yeah, it seems like change is always painful, especially if you have to put a lot of thoughts into it. And maybe, Kati, this also leads me to you. So as CIO at EssenceMediacom, and from speaking to your clients, especially, like from referring from executive conversations, right? What do you think for them is the most important thing to understand, and understand this also as an opportunity? and not only as a regulatory pressure to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree to everything what has been said so far. Plus one thing, and maybe that's the crucial point, that when we started these conversations with our clients to prepare for the cookieless future, I thought, okay, that's obvious, everyone needs this. So we started almost right away with the solution, saying, listen, there are different solutions there. The carpet we were all relying on of third-party cookies will go away. It will not be replaced by a single technology in future. So everything what we all know. So we need to think about it. And here are some solutions that fit perfectly to you. But that was way too fast. We had to learn this because we had to go some steps back beforehand. Because of course, there are so many things you can do, but the question is, what makes sense for you? And this is a tailored, there's no general answer to that. It all starts, what do I actually want to reach with this? We are still talking about, but is then the CTR the same? We all know in this room, probably, that there's no correlation, almost no correlation between CTR and actual leads. And we are still talking about these things. So it was a long, or it is still usually a long way to come to these solutions that require exactly this: legal standpoints, structural changes, data changes, data source audits, etc. So measurement frameworks. There are still redundancies. What kind of data are drawn from by our clients? What is actually needed? So this is also an important and a very vital part of GDPR, that you have this minimizing principle. Only collect data that you actually want to activate and that you actually need for the purpose of marketing in our field. So this is really, it's a long way. We also learned our things, how to approach this, and also to build on that what you just said. It needs to be quantified for the client. So what does it actually bring you? How does it refinance back? How much money will you save in the end to reach the same result? And this is done when it comes also to investment decisions and consulting around. So this is changing. So the working media investment is changing, is sometimes also decreasing in favor of technology and actual consultancy work.
So to me, it seems like there's just a ton of complexity involved from financing those decisions, but also kind of like the thoughts that need to go into the ecosystem. And please answer this maybe from an example that you have top of mind, or just from a consulting point of view. But how should companies, like, if you are the CEO of a major advertiser, like what are the first steps? Is it something that you need to trigger internally, or is it something that you can only trigger externally with partners, with other consultants?
The agency cannot solve everything. So it's of course, it's a common way, or it's a mutual way we have to go. So first we start with the goals. So have your goals clear and the measurement framework belonging to these goals. Then and that's the most vital part for us in this process, we have a data audit, which doesn't mean that we are sitting on the lap of our clients and doing their work. They get the homework, so they need to make this work, because they know best where their data sources are and what they have to touch on. And after that, after we have done this and identified the redundancies, but also the needs of data sources, then we come into the solution. And then we can tailor a technology setup that makes sense and that pays for the goals. And then, of course, there needs time for improvement.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, because the very first step about having clear goals in mind, I'd be very curious, and maybe also now looking to the audience, and again, like by the show of your hands, I know probably most of you don't work in the marketing department, but who of you has a clear understanding of what goals the marketing department is chasing and how they define the KPIs to them? So maybe just show off your hands. I see one hand. So that's very interesting. It seems like already this is a big challenge, right? Defining those goals.
Yeah, because usually we were sitting in the past with the marketing departments of our clients, and now we are sitting with the legal person, with the investment person, with IT people, with everyone who is involved in this huge transformation process, which it is in the end.
Mm-hmm. Markus.
I completely agree with Kati. At that point, I would like to add one point up front. In such a company, you need the agreement of the C-level to that, because this is a change process.
Yeah.
And if you're just taking this from the perspective of one department, then you're wrong. You have to put all this together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can just add there maybe also examples, because of course media is one important part, and we all know there is a lot of money going into those investments, so it's of interest. And you can start there too, because of course the marketing department is asking, how do we do that? Or can we do some tests? How about contextual targeting? Does it work as good as all the other targeting forms? So maybe a starting point, but on the other hand, you have to do a lot of additional conversations on different levels and different teams, because you have to bring all that stuff together. So there might be a starting point from interested, curious, young, talented people, but on the other hand, you also need the support of all the others, and then in the end bring it together, because only when it's integrated, it's really working, because it's not only about the advertising and the third party, but it's gathering first party is much more based on your own media strategy, and then we talk to different people.
And this is maybe something what you can't handle within the company. Therefore, you need a partner, an external partner who guides you through that, who has knowledge in all the relevant parts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe as a last question to this part, is there specific recommendations which you have seen have worked well for companies in terms of accountability? So is this a fully shared accountability across marketing, IT, C-suite, and so on and so forth? Like, can there be something such a fully shared accountability, or does there need to be one department, one team, such as the IT department or the marketing, which should be running the show on this?
The answer is yes. No, it's an integrated work with all the different departments. I mean, I can say this because this is our lighthouse project in this sense. It's and you might not expect this, but it's ÖBB. ÖBB is the most developed client when it comes to cookieless future. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of departments involved at ÖBB. So we are talking to so many different people with different goal sets also. So they all have to be aligned. But if you have them on one table and aligned to a common goal, it's working out. It takes a while, but it's really working out well. And they are really, not only in terms of cookieless future, but also in all the campaigns, the digital campaigns running, they are state of the art. They are really well developed. So it pays also off for other areas.
Wow.
Not only for that.
Amazing to hear, and maybe that's also a good transition, because it's a great case which you mentioned. I just want to have a quick check-in with the audience if there are already questions, so you can show them by hand. Otherwise, we can also keep them for the end for the Q&A. So now I want to transition with you in the second part of this discussion. So now we covered kind of like how is the market feeling about it, how ready is the market, where do we stand? And now in the second part of the discussion, I want to focus on what are potential solutions to the cookieless future, what are strategies that you already see in place, because Kati, you already mentioned like there are examples of who are doing it in a good way. And I want to deep dive a little bit more into this. But first, Tom, to you. as Virtual Mind CTO, and this is a very fundamental question, will remarketing still be possible in the cookieless future? And if so, and if not so, what are potential ways and routes to be explored? What's your view on that?
For sure they are, at least as far as we know. No, yes, it's definitely possible. The thing is, the cookie as the transporter of that identity that's gonna away, or the third-party cookie. But we do see, if we have a look at all those different kind of identifiers, for example, whether you use NetID or ID5, whether you use a deterministic identifier or probabilistic identifier, independently of that, there are other identifiers out there. But it heavily depends on how your structure is as a publisher or as an advertiser. Do we have some kind of logged-in users? How does your structure look like, and how does your data look like? So that's why I really appreciate everyone was saying before. You have to have an idea and you have to have an assessment of what data do you own already, and so that's one of the important things. So you really have to think about what kind of identifier do I use to make that transition going on and that transformation going on. And there comes a little bit what I said before with that fragmentation in mind. There will not be one identifier. And that was a little bit the beauty of the third-party cookie, was that it was defined in a standard, in the HTTP standard. And you can say a lot bad things about the cookie, but it was part of a standard and everyone was able to work with it, to the good and to the bad, but it was a standard. And so what we have now is we have to work with different identifiers. And then the question pops up, what if I want to do advertisement, my identity provider A, but the publisher is using identity provider B? And then ideas popped up. We are one of them. Other competitors do use something similar, which is more or less an identity graph, which builds some kind of meta identity on top of it. You can now discuss, is this kind of meta identity tree, is this something which will live for the next 10 years? We do think that it's some kind of transformation logic. We need to, until we've come to a new stable state. But so far you will need something like that. And then comes the legal question again, like, does the identity provider A allow me to build a meta identity provider on top of it, or does B allow it, and do A and B allow it to be part of that mixed game? And some are and some aren't. Like, some are getting paid by the publishers, some are getting paid by the agencies, some are getting paid by the intermediaries. So it's a very funny mixed game. And there are, I think in 2020 there were 80 identity providers, and now it seems like there are some kind of usual suspects in that space, which you hear quite often. And if I remember the IAB Austria study, the usual suspects are a little bit around ID5 and NetID, if I remember it right. And so there are a few which are here, and then there are a few popping up and emerging newly, like in France now with the First ID, which is a sales house identifier, which can share first-party IDs between all the entities which are represented by a sales house. So there are, again, even while we're discussing, most likely there are 2 new identifiers invented. So that is still a little bit, we're still sitting in a quite fast train, but we have already good identifiers where you can do remarketing. If you want to go forward with identifiers, there are other remarketing use cases where a data clean room can come in place if you have good matchings. I'm not a great fan of matching on email addresses all the time, but that's my personal view. And so please don't shoot me for that. But if it's not the need for some kind of super real-time thingy, then even data clean rooms can be a good partner for doing remarketing cases as well. But the most obvious one is the new identifier world.
And maybe now again a question to the agency representatives here, Babsi, Kati. How well have those ideas already found their way into the market? Because to me it sounds absolutely cutting edge. And I'm just curious, like, how are advertisers dealing with this? Have you presented such ideas, or?
Yes, of course, and cutting edge is great. And if we're not talking to companies like ÖPB or Austrian lotteries, but maybe normal ones or smaller ones, cutting edge seems a little bit like, oh my gosh, is that complicated? Can I just book I/O again? So I think this is also something that could be a turnaround, that people just want to go easier again because they don't have the resources, the time and the energy to invest. And the other, I would say, maybe some kind of danger we should be aware of is that it's that complicated that they want it easy again. And when we look at what companies are able to offer it easy, cheesy, we are talking about the big ones and the walled gardens again, because they offer a great user experience for us as users, for us as companies, as advertisers, to set up our shops, to do the checkout already on Instagram, to do all the kind of retargeting that you don't even need identifiers anymore, because you can put all your money into those walled gardens and they will do the work for you. So I think this is a kind of danger we see. And it reminded me a little bit of the early days of social media where everyone went on Facebook. We built up huge communities and then there came the time pay to play. And this is, of course, one of the dangers if you rely on other technologies and put all your efforts there. So we try to build that, let's say, awareness and talk to our clients about the different solutions, or testing different things. And as you said, there isn't one solution for everyone, and it's strongly depending on, do you need retargeting? Do you track conversions or not, and in what way? And how advanced are you, and how much energy do you want to invest?
Yeah, no, I'm really thinking what to say about this, because I'm not fully agreeing on that ID solutions will be the future, because this is again this would be the easy way, you know, that we have the same like third-party cookies. One standard, one comfortable carpet for all of us again. I don't see this, that the biggest potential in this. And we were also very early, we were starting experimenting with this and also looking at the results when it comes. We even developed our own ID solution just to see what it can do, where the limitations are, etc. And I'm, like you are not a big fan of email matching. I'm not a big fan of ID solutions because I think it's even worse than the cookie was. So in terms of privacy and respecting privacy of users. So we were very early also switching towards more the machine learning and the modeling approaches, and we were training our own algorithms. And we see that this really pays off also in terms of retargeting. That's a similar way that Google goes. But we have, of course, our own solution, and that's transparent, so we can change it all the time and learn out of this. So it's not a black box solution. And this is something we see a future for ourselves, also for smaller clients, because it's working out well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe also to go a little bit back to something that you said, Babsi, about making or facing the decision of, you know, like taking the easy route in terms of, you know, like going into those walled gardens with ready-to-go solutions. It seems to be the opposite of a first-party strategy. How do you, like, what's your recommendation as an agency if you face a client, you know, who misses that open-mindedness for the future?
Well, I think this is then a real consulting issue. So clients should be aware of what they are doing with the data. The final decision is not ours, of course. But I would for sure try to ask the client to evaluate what is happening with the data. And I think we've been talking about data ownership to our clients for years now. So this is something they should be aware of. But if you have to do something quick, you might not always think about all the consequences that might go with it. So this is something where also the Austrian market and maybe even the IRB has its part to explain to the clients, to advertisers, companies, what's happening, and that first-party data might be a little bit more effort, but for sure is paying out also in the long run.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what's an easier practical step into a first-party strategy? Is there one? I mean,
If it would be that easy, more hands would have been raised at the beginning, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, but we want to help that transition, right? So maybe Kati, from your point of view, you mentioned ÖBB. I'm just super curious about this case because in the end, it's a company that would be perceived by the market as very traditional, I guess. Not necessarily, just speaking from my personal opinion, not necessarily profit-driven if you compare it to a player which is operating in a completely open market. So what has driven them? And how did they actually realize it? Like, was it very strong leadership on the topic? Was it very strong know-how on a operational level? Like,
Actually, I think to some extent we created that awareness. And we also in the past, even if the image might not be that innovative for ÖBB, also in the past we had some very interesting and forward-thinking campaigns with them. So the openness is there in the market department, although there are restrictions from the pure size of the company, I would say. But what we started very small with some nice cases, replacing cookies and testing out very early. It was 5 years ago that we tested the first campaigns with them, and they just saw the results. And back then, we were not even allowed to set pixels on their page, even if they have a ticket shop, even if they are dependent on the results. So we were kind of also forced to find solutions around the pixel very early. So it's a mixture, it's a combination of different things. But of course, we were also very open and direct with them to also make them aware what it means if they are not looking at their first-party data, if they are not looking at the cookieless solutions. As they had internal regulations that they were not allowed to set pixels, that was an open door, so to say.
And thinking about that kind of like regulatory-induced innovation, which I at least perceive as it is with ÖBB, I would be curious about also what's the talk within IAB? Like, is the regulatory pressure in Europe understood as maybe as a spark for competition and also to compete with the US in a much stronger way in the future? Because we're thinking about problems they might not be thinking that hard about.
Well, it's a dangerous question, I would say. No, you know, I'm not representing the IAB board in Europe. Yeah? I'm part of the governance board and in the steering group. So I can only talk about that area. And then I was on the annual meeting on Monday in Madrid. So I would say there is not one voice about that it's perceived as good or bad. The IAB Europe is a representation of all European countries with regards to advertisement. And we have the situation that we do not only represent more than 20 countries, we represent different flavors of DPAs in those 20 countries. And then we even have situations like in Germany, there you have 18 different DPAs as well within the country itself. And so this is somehow reflected in the discussions. And then we have the situation that in different larger countries, we have very strong national, local players. Other countries, most likely smaller ones, are very much dominated by US players. So there is all kind of interest involved within the IAB. But that's the good thing. And the bad thing is there's always a lot of friction discussion, but that's the idea of such a body at the end. But there is a lot of common ground, and one of the common grounds is, even if you like it or not, and even if it's a little bit under fire still, is that you need some kind of signalings. And like Markus said at the beginning, the job of the IAB is to make collaboration possible, to make discussion possible, to make education possible, and to define what needs to be defined on a certain level. And so I think that especially the TCF standard as a way how we communicate at a certain level and how we transport messages was a very important part. And that's a little bit the glue of the IAB itself, beside a lot of policy framework thingies and how to talk to APDs and stuff like that. But yes, there is not one opinion on it in general.
Okay, very, very interesting. And maybe also from an agency point of view, because both your agencies or agency networks are truly global. And like, do you feel some kind of like scrutiny or maybe even more interest into what's going on in Europe and how, like maybe regulatory pressure has sparked innovation in Europe? Is there awareness? Are your US counterparts looking at Europe for that kind of innovation?
Not so much.
I wouldn't have realized it either.
No. Actually, I realized that we, as a small market in Austria, I think we also have an advantage as an agency because we have to be more generalists, and because even in our headquarters in UK, they have a specialist for everything. Really for everything, and this is great for us because then we can draw from this specialism knowledge where we don't have the time to dig really deep in that. But when it comes to solutions, and sometimes also pragmatic solutions for smaller clients, for smaller budgets, for shorter ways, then we are much quicker. Of course, we do also have some international clients who were also maybe too early with their decisions on having a DMP, for instance, before setting up the goals. Then, yeah, we also can learn from this. Let's put it this way.
Very interesting. We have 10 minutes left, and something which I really wanted to do is to get to kind of like translate this conversation to a more practical level. And I know we have various perspectives. So we have the agency view, we have the IAB view, we have the technological view on this. And I'd be curious about your recommendations, for companies out there, because I think especially on the stream, we have a lot of advertisers dialed in as well. And I think they are very curious, what can they do within their organizations? Like how can they perceive this not only as a task, but more as a chance to position them better for the future? So whoever wants to start.
At first, my back to the audience here and also to the screens at home is be open-minded. Be open-minded because there are a lot of developments coming in the next months. Also thinking about AI and all the stuff. And I want just a quick look back in, I think it was 2017 or 18, where at this time Rocket Fuel presented the first DSP with AI functionality and all the stuff. Futuristic. And to be honest, it was working pretty well. The problem was no one was trusting the technology. So no one was using Rocket Fuel. And in the end, Rocket Fuel was bought by Amazon. So I would say there was a reason why this was working well or why they were bought. So this is also relevant. Trust all the possibilities that are on the market, even it's graphs or IDs or whatever it is. And this is the second point. My back here again, prepare budgets for that. We're close to the end of the year in budget phases. So I would say latest in October, you have the budget for next year. Prepare there a part, playing money to try it and search for a partner that guides you through that process.
Okay, yeah. Perfect.
May I just go on to the budget, also set up the teams appropriately. So maybe you need a different setup than you work normally in big companies with different departments. Maybe you need a matrix organization, people from different departments having one goal and working on that, having the budget and the resources, because then it can really work out well. And there is even one step you have to do before that, and you kind of mentioned that. Go to your teams and talk to your people, ask them for the recommendations they have. Maybe they say different things than you do. And then do the audit, set your goals, make sure to measure those goals, have a timeline and stick to it. And also stay open and curious and accept if something is not working and move on to the next thing.
So being open-minded, having the budgets, having the teams in order, having a clear timeline or project for this.
And failure is allowed.
Yeah.
I may say a sentence now which I start hating already. It's testing. Because in the last couple of years, the whole EdTech and MarTech scenery, we really stressed the customers to test. It was sometimes it felt like infinite loops of tests, and it's not only us. Even have a look at what Google is doing with the privacy sandbox invitations for testing and stuff like that. So knowing that you have to test tools in order to get the best out of it, to understand the value of the tools and how you can treat them best is the one thing. So sometimes you're urged to do testing, but it's always a question when it's the right point to do testing. So I would really say, yes, you have to test, but please, as my other fellow speakers have said already, have a plan up front and then test according to that plan, not just because that's a new identifier or a new contextual solution. You know, it's not me too. I have to know exactly how it's working. First have a plan and then do proper testing and build your hypothesis. And then either you say verified, falsified, and next, because then you have a real learning curve, which you may need in order to be adapted properly.
Would it be fair to say be data-driven in that?
Yeah, be data-driven sounds so good. The first question then would be, what kind of data are we talking about? And then it comes back to the question, how does my data strategy look like? How do I know what data I have? And is the data collected and stored appropriately? And so it's some kind of infinite loop of the questions at the end.
It's not so easy. Speak, listen, learn. So, but this is also something that we had to learn because we, as tech people, we are so much in love with all these nice solutions, I have to admit. And we are coming to the client and telling them, oh, listen, this is so cool. That's the hot stuff. And you have to have it because we are so convinced that it's working out. And that's the first mistake you can do. Because first of all, we have to ask us, as an agency, but especially the client, what keeps you awake at night? What problems do you actually have besides of media? So, and how can media help then, or how can technology help you to solve this? And this is so much about communicating with each other and sharing ideas and going new paths and trying out and learning from these, getting insights. And I think that's the key, and this is what we have learned also on our way.
Very interesting. A lot of mindset challenges. All right, we have 4 minutes left on the clock, so I think we would have time for 1 to 2 questions from the audience. I see there's already one question in the front. All right, the microphone is coming. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much for the very interesting insights. I try to understand what I learned right now. And there are 2 main things. First, a lot of companies or people don't have a strong strategy for cookieless future. Yeah. The second thing is that cookieless already exists, right? If you don't have a consent, you usually don't have a cookie. If you don't have a cookie, you don't have an identifier, and so on and so forth. Yeah. What I do not understand is why we're not acting right now. Yeah. And I think there's something missing, and that's the business impact, right? I think Kati mentioned it a little bit, and maybe that will keep people up at night. Yeah. What does it mean to don't have cookies, 10% less cookies? For example, do I lose money do I use technology that I have to pay 100%, and I can't use everything? There's a study out there, I think from Accenture, saying that you just use 60% of the technology that you have, of the potential of the technology, right? Usually you pay 100%, so there's something missing. So maybe you have some examples or use cases that gives a context what means cookie-less, having less cookies, and the business impact to all of maybe you, not just Kati, but I think that would be very interesting. And I think that's also to think about, what does that mean on a business perspective?
Maybe a hard thesis on that. I think there is too less awareness of what are you missing right now. It's a hard shift when I say now we are talking since years about dying of print media because governance and others are keeping it alive so it doesn't hurt, and it has to hurt that you develop something or that you are forced to develop something. And I think in some cases, in a lot of companies, there is too less knowledge about what does it mean if you're missing 70% of users. You cannot track them. So and if there is no awareness, then why should it change? Because business is still increasing probably. So, okay, scale it by 5% up and down, and everything is okay.
Thank you a lot for this question. Of course, I'm not allowed to share details of single clients, but of course, there's also a study that says if you are not acting now, you will lose 80% of your income or outcome in this point. And for us, it was so interesting to see that it's true and that we really reach the same numbers. So before we go into a project with our clients, we define how does success look like. So if we replace the cookies you used in the past for your e-commerce shop or whatever, and if we are using now these new technologies, what will we reach for you? How does it look like then? And there's a number there. We are quantifying this in euros and see if we can get there and how long it takes us and what needs to be adapted. But that's crucial.
And would that keep us up at night? Is it like a high number? Is it just to get in? Because at the end,
it is. Actually, when you see also when you're prospecting this in the future, it's not only this year. Of course, it's also next year, and even if you only start this year, which is already very late, to be honest, you have lost a lot of money. We are not considering this in the number, but because we are starting from that actual point. But this is what we are doing to create this awareness and to also make the respective people on the client side also open to move and to do something about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Considering we are right on time, I think it's time to say thank you for the interesting discussion. And Kati, I think you had an idea about the picture for the end, right?
Yeah, that was an order from my marketing director.
Perfect. So Nina, just one more minute. We're doing the picture and then we're off the stage. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mit deinem Handy gleich, Kati? Einfach rein in die Audience in die Mitte.
So please just show your hands for the cookies.
So, kommt alle her.
Da hinten geht's runter.
Oh.
Ja.
Cheese. Der Finger ist drauf. Irgendwo ist der Finger.
Ja. Und der Markus nicht ganz.
Ja, ich bin nicht so wichtig.
So. Kommt der Finger da drauf.
Super.
Perfect. Thank you so much.